Hi, welcome to this week's episode of Till Death Do Us Pod with me, Michael Lee.
And me, totally.
Good to be here.
I
Good to be
just
back.
realized you haven't done an intro in
Never.
a very long time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
What's that about?
You kind of jump in there. Probably. It's probably why I just
take over.
Exactly. So there we are. Nice to do it.
Yes, nice to do it. We again had technical problems today, but we're here, which is good. And I'm really kind of excited about today's show because this is the first time we've ever done any sort of politics.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Is it kind of politics?
Yeah, well, I mean, the mayoral elections in London, where we're from, is in a couple of weeks' time, and lots of candidates.
Yes, a lot.
There's a lot of candidates. I've never kind of bothered again because when you look at the normal press, you see Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem. There's always one bloke who's got lots of money, and you see these posters everywhere of one man. You're like, who? Is this a joke? Is this for like a TV show? Is this to be a spoof TV show? And there is one. I must have been, clearly his advertising worked because I can't remember his name, but they're all down the North Cirque. Very sort of like Alan Partridge-like, very kind of, you know. And then you don't hear about the others. What's his name?
They've always got a giant bus as well. So he's a dude with a lot of money and a great big bus.
Yeah, and a big bus.
Yeah. Wait, but I
want to know what happens to that bus after the election.
But
is it sort of quietly sold on exchange and marks? Is it on eBay? Does it become like a kids' fun bus? What happens to those big buses?
That's a very scary thought. But you touched on something very interesting. You said there's always loads of blokes.
Oh God, yeah.
Loads of blokes, and not many women.
No. Well, there's none for the major parties. Forget about it.
Exactly.
Which I'm sure we'll talk to our guest coming up about why she thinks that is, because it is a bit bizarre.
So today we are talking to the lovely Mandu Reid,
who's candidate for the Mayor of London.
Very exciting. Hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
No, it's a pleasure. It really is a pleasure.
And as we said, we didn't say that, the party you are standing for, that we're fascinated to hear about, is the Women's Equality Party. Quite sad that even in 2021, your party even has to exist.
Yeah, that there needs to be the Women Equality Party. It's just...
50% of the population needs a party.
Yes.
In itself is bizarre, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But what was the sort of, what's your kind of, just let the listener know your kind of background and how you ended up now standing for the Women's Equality Party as candidate for mayor?
Sure. I mean, I wake up every morning and sometimes ask myself that very same question. I'm not one of those people who, as a child, had ambitions to be prime minister and always imagined myself holding high political office. Absolutely not. But, you know, life works out in funny ways, and our party's only 6 years old. It came to my attention when it was formed, and I thought that's interesting. But at that point, I was kind of disillusioned with party politics. I had been a member previously of the Labour Party, and that just wasn't a great experience for me. I found it really unsatisfying because a lot of the stuff I believe passionately in, were always a footnote, right? And I wanted to campaign for the things that I saw needed improving, but couldn't find a vehicle to do it. Didn't trust this new party initially to be any different from, you know, the mainstream players out there. So I kind of like applauded at a distance and kept my distance. However, as I kind of like delved a little deeper into what this party's trying to do, how it's trying to do it, what it stands for, I found myself realizing that, you know, it's not good enough to just be a cheerleader on the sidelines. I need to put my energy and my passion into it. So I got involved as a volunteer. I got elected to an internal position within the party. I stood for election. And then the previous leader stood down, and I found myself kind of being lobbied to put myself forward, became the party leader. I'm really compressing the story for you. It's not quite. What
was just that instance like? You said you've got to volunteer. Many of us out there, I'm sure, have volunteered for various things. And next minute you're like, excuse me, you want me to be leader? Excuse me?
You know what? I actually think I should zoom in a little bit on the moment where I decided to get more involved. And it actually does tie into something that's super personal for me. when I was 30, I'm 40 now. When I was 33 years old, I got pregnant, and I got pregnant accidentally. I wasn't in a proper relationship with the man. I'm not showing off, but he was a lot younger than me.
Well done.
He was. This, I promise you, this is relevant. I'm not just throwing that in for, I don't know, as a badge of honor or something. But and I, you know, we had conversations about, well, what are we going to do about this situation? And believe it or not, I'm the leader of the UK's first and only feminist political party. But believe it or not, I couldn't imagine, and neither could he, a situation where I was not going to be the main or sole caregiver of the child if the child materialized. I couldn't even imagine it, a situation. And he certainly couldn't imagine it. He was, you know, 23 years old or whatever. And so the conversations we had were, we were having conversations on quite different parallels. You know, he was worried about if he's going to be in trouble with his mum and dad. I was worried about, how I was going to make ends meet, how I was going to maintain my kind of sanity under the pressure of trying to be a single mom, but pursuing my career aspirations, my plans, my potential, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, what I eventually concluded was that I couldn't make it work. And so I had a termination, age 33. I've always actually wanted to be a mother. But I just looked at everything and I just felt like this is impossible. And I know that there are millions of single mothers out there who do this. I am in awe of them, but I didn't think I was able to do what it would take to kind of raise a child and pursue the sort of path that I had already been trying to forge for myself. And
what were you doing work-wise at this stage? What
I was actually working for the Mayor of London. Boris Johnson at the time was the mayor, and I was working for him. And that's significant as well, because City Hall is, as London employers go, super generous when it comes to, you know, flexible working and I still, factoring that in, just felt like I cannot make all these numbers add up. I don't think I can handle this situation. And so I made the choice to have a termination. And the fact of him being younger than me matters, because a lot of the time people say in heterosexual couples that the man earns more, and that's the reason why the woman takes time out from her career and does the majority of, you know, the childcare and all of that. This guy wasn't earning more than me. I mean, you know, he barely, he was, you know, only a year or two out of university. He did not have, it would have made sense, if that's logical, for him. I'll have the baby, sure, and why don't you be the primary caregiver? I'll carry on with my work and let's do that. But no, that was impossible for either of us to imagine. Now let's loop it back to the Women's Equality Party. When I started delving into what the Women's Equality Party policies were, I discovered our policies in relation to equal parenting and caregiving. So what we're campaigning for is free universal childcare from the end of parental leave up to age 5. By the way, it pays for itself within about 5 years of introducing that policy. It sounds like an expensive thing, but it pays for itself because more women can be in the workforce, paying taxes, not claiming benefits. Is great for the economy overall. And the other policy is proper shared parental leave, a bit like they have in Northern Europe, where the men and the women have an entitlement. It's use it or lose it. So if the men don't take it, the family unit as a whole loses it. And that really incentivizes men to play their part. It makes it possible for them to do it. It reduces the stigma from them doing it. And it makes it possible for the family to balance the books, because it's remunerated at 90% of whatever your wages are. And so I realized if that policy was the real deal here in the UK, I could have made a different decision in that situation, age 33, having my aspirations and plans for my life, not being in a proper relationship with the father of this potential child, but we could have worked something out that worked better for both of us. And so when I learned that, I realized, okay, this isn't just a nice idea that I can kind of give a nod to and perhaps, if I'm feeling generous, vote for when elections come around. I wanted to roll my sleeves up and play my part in campaigning for this kind of politics, these kind of ideas that none of the other parties take seriously enough. And so I got more involved. And then, as I've described, there was this fairly rapid journey that lasted 18 months, 2 years, which a series of coincidences happened, and I found myself leader of the party, and here I am in 2021 standing for London Mayor.
Amazing.
Yeah. You know, you touched on something so important. You sort of like the way you presented you know, childcare and how it's a family affair rather than the woman's issue, and how actually providing more resources for family, like you said, makes society better. It's even better for the economy. These are things that people don't realize. I just don't think they're said enough, and actually and I don't think it's most people understand this. Do you think, I'm just being I'm being difficult a little bit, or not difficult, trying to include more people. Like, do you think that because the party's obviously called Women's Equality Party, and that immediately appeals to half of the population, just to women. Like, how do we? I'm just trying to think, like, how do we make the conversation broader so that men feel like this is also good for me? It's not just good for my wife, or it's good for maybe the future of my daughters, but this is actually really good for all of us. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. And it is a question that I get asked quite a lot, actually. And the first thing to say is men are absolutely welcome to join our party. And we have men who are members. Our male membership is not as high as I would like. It's about in the region of 9% of our membership are male. And I think that's interesting in and of itself, because what is it about those guys that makes them feel like they're prepared to be part of this, even though on the label it says Women's Equality Party? So it shows you that it's possible for men to engage, even if we don't necessarily kind of like pander or water down how inequality, gender inequality in society primarily is damaging for women, although it also is damaging for men too. But I always say to people that, you know, we have to, at this point, we're only 6 years old, we have to at this point really zoom in on who is at the sharp end of gender inequality and who has not been served by politics, by the economy, by the way society is organized. And the analogy I often give is, you know, think about the civil rights movement in the USA back in the day, the Black Panthers, right? Nobody said to them, why don't you call yourself the Panthers, not the Black Panthers, in order to make your movement more palatable to white people who need to be on board. And so I think, and it's a bit like, because with South Africa, the African National Congress, the ANC, African in that context, it's euphemism for Black. You don't, no one said to them, call yourself the National Congress, because we don't want to alienate the white people who wield a lot of power. So what we really need, and I'm not saying I have the answer yet, but what we really need, and I want to have the kind of conversations that show men that they have as much to gain by championing these issues, whilst at the same time not having to water down the harsh reality of the situation, which as things stand, has, you know, women on the back foot when it comes to the way inequality manifests. And so I'd love to explore that more, but it is a conscious decision to be called at this juncture the Women's Equality Party. But I don't want that to be a barrier to men. I want men to join our party out of naked self-interest, because they got a lot to gain too. And imagine the women in your life being happier and more benefit from that too, surely, my brother. So
that would be a great strapline for your next promotional thing. You've got to have that on your posters. Trust me, that will work. What a great line to use.
I said, sure. No, I'm with you. Like, don't get me wrong. I am totally with you. I say it like from my perspective, because obviously, you know, women's rights is at the heart of what I do, but I do it like, you know, just as like my videos and stuff. But I have loads of conversations about this exact point with Mike, you know, just like, what is it? How do I inspire you to be more involved, to do more? Like, what? Because I want to know, like, how, because I do think it is a thing that we have to it has to be everybody's interest at the end of the day. But what I love, you're saying you don't water it down, and you're right. You said the word feminist within the first 3 minutes of speaking, which is great, because a lot of people are scared of that word. Right?
I used to be.
Yeah. So let's talk about that just a little bit. Like you said, we are the first feminist party in the UK. What does that mean? Do you get that kind of reaction of like, ooh, feminists, ooh, we don't like that? How do you tackle that?
I mean, I have to say that I was a late developer when it came to feminism. I wasn't until I was 26 that I felt, around age 26, that I felt comfortable, you know, sort of labeling myself as such. And even then it was kind of like, I don't know, I felt squeamish about it and would only sort of use the F word in certain company. So it took me a while. But I do think that over the last, let's say 5 to 10 years, feminism has, in a way, to a degree, and certainly with younger generations, its image has been rehabilitated. Because, you know, when I was like 19, I was no way like these, you know, 19-year-olds you see on Instagram who understand what feminism is. They talk about things like intersectionality. They talk about things that I was totally oblivious to when I was their age. And so what I will say there is I think the trend is moving in a positive direction. I think the next frontier is how do we get, as you've already alluded to, men to feel that when the word feminism is used, it's not used in a hostile way towards them. And also, you know, I'm 40 years old, and so people of our generation, I think we have a little bit of work to do to sort of shed our own kind of the negative connotations we hold about the idea of feminism being something that will have you ostracized or pigeonholed in negative ways. But I think the youngsters are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us, because honestly, they're so different from how, I mean, I don't know what you were doing. When I was like 19, 20, I was considered, I mean, it's a bit embarrassing, to be honest. I was falling in love and getting drunk and not really tuned in to gender equality as something that was relevant to me. In fact, I did think feminism, I go as far as to say, as I thought it was bullshit. I thought it was unnecessary. I thought the work had been done. And my God, did my mind get blown open as I kind of came to the end of my 20s, and as I've already described, hit my 30s and had that experience of an unplanned pregnancy. So yeah, I think things are moving in the right direction, and some of us need to work on ourselves. Why are we squeamish about this word? Because all it is saying men and women should share power, and that will be better for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right about the younger generation. I see it a lot. Even more, you mentioned Instagram, but even more so on TikTok. I mean, the stuff they say, sometimes I think, my God, that was so profound, you know, like, and they're so young. And you're right. I didn't have these thoughts till very much later in my life as well. And we're raising 3 daughters, and you know, my 10-year-old will come up to us now and show us something and go, "Mommy, that was sexist," you know, and I'm like,
wow. And that's normally something that I've said.
No, it's not.
Well done, parents. Well done, parents. If you're 10-year-old has a feminist consciousness, I mean, totally, that's the best news I've heard all week.
Yeah, and they will do that. And you know, I think about all the years that those things just went over my head because they were just so normalized, you know, from the smallest things to even big things that you just kind of accept because you grew up watching, you know.
But that's it, because during lockdown, we've obviously watched lots of television, lots of films, and we've probably now watched every family film from
under the sun
made from 1970 to the present day.
Wow.
And of course, pretty much 95% of them are sexist, have stuff in it. When even I'm sitting there going, oh, really? You know, especially kind of teen type movies. And I think so. It's just come from that kind of conversation that, you know, why are we squirming a bit in our seats a bit? You think, oh, I don't want my daughters to think this is like normal.
That this is normal, you know? That this is okay, you know? I just want to go back to something else that you mentioned. So we talked about the whole idea of women's, when women is in the title and all of that. But I want to talk about women. Because you know, we're having a conversation now, and it's like it's an obvious thing. There's still a way to go. There isn't 100% equality. We talked about childcare, which is an obvious one. I don't know about you. Do you, when I put out like my feminist videos, I get resistance sometimes from women.
Yeah.
And I always find that harder to cope with, because when men sort of question it, oh, stop it, you can do whatever you want.
Lighten up.
Lighten up. Why are you so serious? It doesn't really affect me as much, because I think, well, you're enjoying male privilege, and sometimes when you enjoy privilege, you don't realize you enjoy the privilege, and it can annoy you when somebody kind of is trying to change it. But when women have a resistance, I find that harder.
What kind of resistance do you get?
No, the same. Like, why are you complaining?
Things.
Everything, you're oversensitive. It's not true. I can do, I always say, there's a few things that I say. The number one thing I say is, okay, but you're very lucky. You live in a modern, maybe a country that allows you to vote and allows you to do all these things, these amazing things that you do. And look, there's a lot of other women in other parts of the world who are still not in our boat even. So let's talk about them. That's one thing I say. But it hurts me. Like, do you know what I mean? I get upset.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot, and it's something I deal with quite a lot as well. And I think I've been on a journey with it. And where I'm at now, God knows if this is the end of my journey, and maybe I will revert back to being really kind of impatient and fed up with these people. But I'm not in that place at the moment. The way I feel at the moment is I actually feel compassion when women pipe up in those ways, because actually when it comes down to it, all of us have been socialized and brought up in a world built upon patriarchy and male supremacy. There's no way your psyche isn't going to be affected. I mean, you mentioned teen movies, for example, and the sort of undertones and sometimes overtones of sexism built into those storylines and those narratives. We're all absorbing that stuff. And the analogy I like to give is I grew up in Southern Africa in the twilight years of apartheid, right? My mother's black, my father's white. And so basically the existence of our family was politically significant. But what that did in some ways is it gave me a front row seat to some of the dynamics of how prejudice plays out. And so you're growing up in an environment which is as white supremacist as it gets in modern times. This is apartheid South Africa. And if you're not a white person in that context, it's actually very hard to grow up unscathed from internalizing messages that tell you either that you are inferior because you belong to this sort of category of the population, or the way to get ahead is to mimic the oppressor, or to kind of like pull your bootstraps up and kind of focus on ignoring or dismissing or denying the ways in which you are disadvantaged. It's all coping mechanisms. So I do think for a lot of women, because the data's there. I mean, if you really want to look at the data is not telling an ambiguous story about how women are on the back foot when it comes to equality between men and women. And so in a way, I think a lot of people who come up with resistance to these ideas, it's a little bit of internalized misogyny. It's a function of growing up in a society, in a world that almost wants you to think in those ways. And you can get ahead if you do think and act in certain ways that the system commands and demands of you. I mean, think about Margaret Thatcher and her premiership. She's like the most macho prime minister, that we had in that period of time. And I believe that was partly a survival mechanism. It was a way to rise to the top in a system where almost everything is baked in to make you have to like deny or downplay what might come naturally to you as a woman, and elevate traits that are more kind of amenable and will help get you forward in a world that's built by and for men. So at the moment, but maybe my patience will wear out, but at the moment I feel compassion generally, and I actually love having conversations with people who have those views, because I always learn something about what's behind their thinking. But it is a shame. I do know what you mean.
It's interesting what you say about Thatcher then, because as you said that, I totally agree with what you say. I then thought you could argue, I'm obviously not from that country, Angela Merkel as well comes across in that kind of way. Golda Meir in Israel many, many years ago as well. There's something about when women finally get this chance to lead a country, they do probably, as you just said, think in their head they had to play that role to become more acceptable to the powerful men around them, as opposed to maybe someone like the New Zealand leader. Again, I haven't seen much about her, but I think she's very different, and it works.
But isn't that also just our concept of what a leader is, and also the concept of what power or strength is?
Yes,
you know, we have an idea of what that should look like, so we're all kind of trying to mimic that. Even probably men, you know, are all men like that? I don't know. Maybe men are playing a role as well. Like, do you know what I mean?
Oh my God, no. The sort of patriarchy, male supremacy also pigeonholes men. In fact, I think it makes it even harder for men to demonstrate compassion or some of these traits that haven't historically been associated with successful leaders. But yes, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand is completely breaking that mold and is leading her country extremely successfully. You've got the Icelandic Prime Minister the same. You've got the whole team of women who are in charge in Finland. There's 5 of them. And so there are new templates emerging that are a counterweight to the sort of traditional old school strongman politics. And I'll tell you what, I had a debate with myself when I was contemplating, am I going to go down this path of leading a political party and trying to do this in an environment that's hostile to women? And I'm the first Black person to lead a national political party in British history as well. So there's double jeopardy there. But what I promised myself was that I will not wear the fancy dress of a politician. And so I do talk about things and in ways that actually don't conform to what's normal for a politician. And I know sometimes that works for me. Sometimes the press get confused and they don't know what to do with me. But generally, at least I am true to myself. You know, when I'm 90 years old doing my knitting, I'm not going to look back and think, I don't recognize that person. And so I hope I'm setting an example of how you can do this stuff without mimicking the templates that are very narrow templates for women, for anybody trying to do politics.
So you don't have the style guru, someone telling you how to talk and how to deliver lines.
Do I look like that?
In front of cameras.
No, I don't. I'll tell you what, I wouldn't mind having a stylist. But then I've kind of like always fancied that, you know what I mean?
Wouldn't we all love a stylist? That would be amazing. Mandu, I want to do a swift kind of change of subject to something a bit kind of less pleasant to talk about, but very important. And that is violence towards women. Obviously, this is, it's a global issue, but also definitely in the UK and in London. And there's been a rise of domestic abuse throughout the pandemic. The numbers are just so depressing and horrific to even think about. And of course, with the Sarah Everard's murder, just not even a month ago, how is the party kind of tackling those type of issues? Is that something on your agenda?
It's always been on our agenda, always, from day one. So it's one of the ways, and there are many ways, that we are different from other parties because, we don't just remember that women exist on International Women's Day. We don't just recognize that violence against women and girls in society is a problem when there's a high-profile murder. We have been working on this stuff literally day in, day out from day dot. And our manifesto from the beginning is very much about trying to tackle the causes and consequences of violence against women and girls, because we know that inequality is at the heart of why this is one of the most prevalent crimes in our society. The power asymmetry between men and women is what creates the conditions for this kind of violence to be so commonplace, not just here, but in any society in the world. And so, the logical thing is you move towards a world where men and women are truly equal citizens, and you move towards eliminating that form of violence. But then if you're talking about specifics, you know, well, what can and what could and should be done about it? Well, there's a hell of a lot of work to do. First of all, we got to acknowledge the scale of the problem. And like I say, not just acknowledge it when there's a high profile murder that is in the news cycle. We've got to acknowledge it day in, day out. I mean, you know, every single 2 women a week are killed by men in this country. We're going to be on this podcast now, aren't we, for an hour? By the time the hour is done, 6 women around the world will have been murdered by men. Every hour, 6 women are murdered by men, and it's usually men that they know. And it's not going in the other direction. You know, women aren't murdering men at anywhere near those rates. So it's a super gendered crime. And so, yeah, we believe that if we're talking about, there's so many areas. Policing is one area, but a lot of people make the mistake of zooming in solely on policing. So you've heard the politicians in response to what happened with Sarah Everard, say even the mayoral candidates, right, more bobbies on the beat, I pledge, this is a serious issue, I pledge to put more bobbies on the beat. Are you joking me? Most domestic abuse happens inside the home. What are you gonna do, put a bobby on my sofa? You know, inside my house? Bobbies on the beat is not going to protect women from domestic abuse. Rape in London, every year, 8,000 women approximately, and the numbers are going up year on year, report rapes. And you know rape is underreported, so that's just a tip of the iceberg. Most women are raped by somebody that they know, often in a home. Are more bobbies on the beat going to protect women from being raped? No, they ain't. And so one of the things that absolutely needs to be addressed is this fallacy of crime and punishment and traditional policing being a real solution to ending violence against women and girls. But what we do have to do with policing, and I am campaigning hard on this, is demisogynize the police force. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, it was a couple of weeks ago, The Guardian published an investigation which stated that 600 allegations of sexual misconduct over the last 6 years, 600 had been reported as being committed by Met Police employees. Can you imagine another employer where that kind of rate of sexual misconduct was reported, and we just sort of shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, why are we not zooming in, which we should do? Today is the 22nd of April. It is the anniversary of Stephen Lawrence's death. After his death, there was the McPherson Review into institutional racism in the police force. We need a review about institutional sexism in the Met Police if we're going to allow police to play their part in addressing violence against women and girls. Only an institutionally sexist police force would police a vigil, the Sarah Everard vigil, in the way that they did. Just a few weeks before, Rangers fans were celebrating their title victory, and the police were there being gentle, clapping along. We can't allow this.
So this is exactly the point. So again, I obviously have much less knowledge on these topics than you do, but from my point of view, how I look at it, I'm thinking, you know, you mentioned the numbers of murder and violence towards women, how many women are murdered every day and every minute and every year. I think the numbers of men being murdered are higher, right? So obviously the issue is male violence.
Yes.
But when the issue becomes, I think, problematic in how I see it is how the law views the violence against women. Somehow, some forms of violence against women, it almost feels like have been decriminalized. Like you look at rape, rapists just walk free after, like they don't get like a lot of punishment. I wonder if a person would, I just feel like people would think twice if they actually thought they would get proper punishment. And I'm talking about also how victims and survivors are treated by law enforcement, even by the justice system in general. I heard on the radio, you know, rape victims and survivors talking about, you know, being questioned by male police interrogators rather than women. Like it just feels like the whole system is geared up to wear you down so that you just don't get justice. And so the numbers, you know, compared to probably men being inflicted violence by other men, is probably lower. But I just feel the attitude towards violence against women is almost like a bit blasé. Would you agree with that?
If you're talking about murders, of course the numbers tell a story. But if you're talking about domestic abuse, which is one of the most prevalent crimes in this country, there are, 1.6 million women every year are victims of domestic abuse. 1.6 million. It is one of the most prevalent crimes. And so when you talk about rape, domestic abuse, actually, women are disproportionately in the victim seat when it comes to that stuff. But yes, the policing, I mean, and this is relevant to the mayoral elections, because a lot of people don't realize that the mayor is London's PCC. That stands for Police and Crime Commissioner. Yeah. So as a politician, he is responsible for the police strategy, the police budget, how it does its business. And since this mayor has been in office, charge rates for sexual violence are a seventh of what they were when he came into office. And so when I say charge rates, that's women who are making complaints and submitting them to the police. And a charge only happens if the police investigate it properly and allow it to proceed through the criminal justice system. Why are they a seventh? What is going on there? It tells you all the stuff you alluded to about how, women are not believed, they are not treated well. The system itself has a sort of baked in problem that means it's harder than it should be for women to get justice. And let me tell you, I've been chased, I've been groped, I've had a man expose his penis to me on a London Underground station and masturbate at me. All of that stuff, I didn't go to the police even once, and that is because I didn't feel that there was any point in making a complaint. I didn't have any confidence that I would be treated with respect and that it would actually go anywhere. And so, and
also it links back to what we talked about earlier about the norms that we've been we've been used to. Is like, you kind of think, well, that's part of being a woman. You know, if I'm not in a club and somebody doesn't brush, by my boob or grab my ass at any point, was it really a night out? You know, no, seriously. But it's like these things that you grow up thinking, well, that's normal. And then I reached a point where in my life that I went, why is that normal? You know, how is that normal? You know? And
I think that's where education and public awareness could make a massive difference. I mean, I personally believe we should be consistently, systematically educating kids from primary right through to university on consent, on respect, on boundaries. So it's just a normal thing that's baked into our psyche. And another thing is, if you think about, I don't know, let's say in the 60s and 70s, drinking and driving was kind of quite normal. You go to the pub, you'd have a few pints and you drive home. We don't do that anymore. We've created, through public awareness, public health campaigning, a culture where it's going to be frowned upon if you do that. And that men and women, and we need something, I believe, that is a similar ongoing type of narrative campaigning day in, day out, that starts to create a culture whereby, because it's not all men who are doing this. I know that. But what I don't see enough of is men making it really problematic for those who do. There isn't enough disapproval of the men who do it, in the way that is disapproval if you have 3 pints and then decide you're going to drive, home with your 5-year-old in the back seat or whatever. Why can't we create a climate of disapproval for sexual harassment?
And it can, but the thing is, going back to the man point, which obviously I am a man.
I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I'm a big football fan. I go to football a lot. And it's slightly completely different topic. Racism in football. Right. Now, there was a time when I went to football in the 70s and 80s, there'd be racist chants, people throwing bananas on the pitch at black players, even their own players. And nothing was done. Now, and I go to football regularly, well, when you were allowed to, when you hear racist stuff, you will turn around to someone and go, come on, mate, whatever, and pull them up. So it can happen. That education amongst men can happen. Now, whether there's, I'm sure, there's now finally, we've got women assistant referees, linesmen now, in the Premier League. I'm sure there's loads of sexist comments aimed at them, and most blokes will turn around and laugh, and you know, it was only a bit of a laugh. But my point is, it can change.
It can change.
If you're educated to say, no, this is wrong. And I think, as you said, starting it from the school system, which they do with racism and everything, it absolutely has to be part of the syllabus.
It does. And the problem is so society-wide. It's ubiquitous. The scale of it is huge. It requires, I think, government-type intervention. I mean, why did they stop drinking and driving? Because it was creating an expensive circumstance for our NHS. Well, domestic abuse, for example, costs this country £66 billion every year for the consequences that flow from all those women who are victims. And that's just one form of violence against women and girls. So even if you don't care about it from a moral perspective, I mean, I've got a problem with you if you don't, but let's say the moral case doesn't move you. There is a business case for addressing these issues. In fact, there is a strong business case for almost any issue you can think of that relates to trying to pursue equality between men and women. And so even if you're, let's say, a conservative leaning politician who cares deeply about balancing the books and the public purse, I promise you, these interventions are going to serve your objectives too.
So why isn't it a priority then? Why?
I think because the status quo is very stubborn. I think it's because of the way power is distributed in our society. And so there is, and it links back to what we started saying earlier in the conversation, I think there's this perception that men have something to lose if we proceed towards a society whereby women can take their place alongside men as equal kind of custodians, power sharers, contributors, leaders, etc., etc. And I think there's this sense as well of, it being quite comfortable for men not being held accountable for these things. It's a little bit like how we've seen, you said it as well, Mike, with racism. There's always a bit of resistance to, first of all, acknowledging the way racism manifests, because you have the people who benefit from it being a bit scared about what's going to lie on the other side. Are there going to be recriminations? No, there won't. I'm not interested in female supremacy. I don't have time for that. That sounds exhausting. I'm interested in sharing power.
Yeah.
What happens now for us listeners in London? Yeah. Because, Sadiq Khan, I mean, you mentioned there, all opinion, absolutely shooing to get in again. How can a vote for the Women's Equality Party actually make a difference as opposed to, oh, well, it's a wasted vote?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely not a wasted vote because in these London elections, you actually get 3 votes.
Right.
You get, to vote for who you want to be the mayor of London. You get a first and second preference. Let's be honest, I'm an outside bet to be the next mayor of London. So, vote for me if you like, but actually I'm an unusual politician. I kind of don't mind if you don't vote for me. What I do want you to do is look for the Women's Equality Party on the orange ballot paper, because we are also electing representatives of the London Assembly, which is like the mini parliament that holds the mayor to account day in, day out. And in 2016, when our party was very young, we had no name recognition. Frankly, we didn't know what we were doing. We contested these London elections and we came within a whisker of getting a seat on that London Assembly. And Sadiq Khan, he does stand up and he says, I am a proud feminist. Well, get a Women's Equality Party rep round the table and we can help him fulfill his feminist potential. Because there are areas where, frankly, he says the right things but doesn't do the right things. He's more kind of performative than transformative in his feminism. And so if you vote for the Women's Equality Party on the orange ballot paper, you can make a difference. You can get one of our reps into City Hall. And small parties always get representation on the London Assembly because the voting system is different from the normal voting system. UKIP have 2 seats. I think they're going to lose one of theirs. We're certainly going after one of their seats. And God forbid, in 2008, when I worked in City Hall, the BNP, the British National Party, had a seat on the London Assembly. So if they can do it, please help the Women's Equality Party be there day in, day out, you know, holding one of the most powerful politicians to account on behalf of London's 4.5 million women and girls, but also for the prosperity of this city as a whole. And it really is not a wasted vote. Vote for me for mayor if you want. That sends a strong message. It shows that people care about this. But really where your vote would make a difference, if you care about equality between men and women, is on that orange ballot paper. We're right at the bottom because, you know, it's alphabetical order. So you gotta get to the bottom of the list on that orange ballot paper. And that's where you can do something that would be historic for London. It would
and without being libelous, you mentioned you work for Boris Johnson, the now Prime Minister. What was he like to work for?
I mean, I worked for him for 8 years.
Wow.
I had for his whole, I mean, I worked for Ken Livingstone before, and I worked for Sadiq Khan for the last few years. And then I sort of, you know, made my escape, and here I am doing this job. I can tell you a story about the conversation I had with Boris Johnson, which helps, I think, to explain a little bit about, you know, who he is, and it relates to this conversation. So I was at the one of the Christmas gatherings that was held in his personal office. There was a whole bunch of us there. You know, it was a very jolly affair, Christmas jumpers, mince pies, singing, and whatever else. And he came and sat with me and one of his other advisors. So, you know, there's a witness to this conversation. And then he was all very jolly. And he said, "So, how are you? Have you had a good year?" "Yes, very good." "What are you reading at the moment?" And I, at the time, was reading Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. You know, it's a really good novel. And he was like, "No, who's that then?" And, you know, my colleague who was there with me said, "Yes, she's an up-and-coming Nigerian author. She's really brilliant. She's, you know, made a big splash on the world stage, et cetera, et cetera." And what he said was, he said, "It's my life's ambition to make love to a Nigerian woman."
Wow.
That's the statement. That was his response to me telling him what book I had read. And you see what I mean? Like that, he was so comfortable and so confident to say something like that as if there's nothing wrong with it. To me, you know, a woman of color. And I'm a little bit ashamed that I didn't have any comeback to that. I was.
How could you? Your mouth must have been agape. Like, really? What did I just hear?
I couldn't believe what I heard. And I looked at, you know, the other guy who was in the conversation, and he was a black man as well. And we both just were like, you know, we just wanted to move the conversation on. But yeah, he is not a guy who's really into the detail. He is a sort of jolly, cheerful chappy. He, I think, was really well suited to Mayor of London because it was a job where you got to be a showman, you know? And the heavy responsibility that comes with Prime Minister, I just don't think suits him as well. And so I think Mayor of London was I think he's a little bit over promoted as Prime Minister. Mayor of London was, I think, about the right level for him. What he did do was he hired really, really brilliant people. You know, his senior team were you know, there's a few of them in there that were just super, super competent and would just get on with the job in a way so he didn't have to be all over the detail.
No, you're right.
Wow, what a story. I'm actually like, I don't have words. I literally don't have anything that threw me. Okay, we are the election's coming up, 6th of May. Last kind of thoughts to leave listeners with. Because to be honest, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I wasn't a registered voter. Is that how I say it? Yeah. Until last week. And I actually registered to be able to vote because of you and because of your party. Yes.
So you're going to vote for someone else?
No. I just think
this is the beauty of this election. You can vote for several parties, and that's what makes it different. And I just want to throw in something about our party before I answer your question. Is one of the things that makes us different is we practice this thing called political polyamory, which means you can be a member of our party and another party. And we don't have a problem with that. We're not possessive. We're not jealous. Other parties, I mean, the Labour Party, for example, they will kick you out if they know that you have been dallying or dabbling with anybody else's politics. And we've done that because we recognize that people are complex.
I love that.
I am not going to demand a kind of like fidelity or loyalty in the same way as other parties do. Because some people might really care about environmental issues and want to support the Greens. I'm saying you crack on with that, and I don't have a problem with you being a member of our party too. That is a completely approach to politics. And
I feel guilty if I go to another hairdresser.
Well, like,
someone else cuts my hair, I feel guilty all day.
There you go.
Have I been caught out? Will my barber know?
I mean, a relationship with a hairdresser is very monogamous, right?
Yeah.
It's a monogamous relationship. But I love that.
We're not about that because if you believe in equality, I don't want you to have to choose between your belief in that and your belief in some other kind of political agendas or ideals. So in this election, you can express the fullness of your political personality by voting for us on the orange ballot paper and for whoever else you like on the other votes that you get to cast. And I think that's really, really important because this thing of trying to pigeonhole people, it hasn't done any of us any good.
I love that. That is so true. I love that. It's so true. And that's how you divide people, by giving them just two options and saying, well, you're either this or you're either that. But we're not like that as people. Okay, last thoughts that you want to leave the listeners with.
Well, I mean, voting for the Women's Equality Party is crucial at this juncture in London's history. We're at a crossroads post-COVID. Women have been disproportionately affected by COVID. We are going to shoulder the majority of job losses in our city. Childcare is a big factor in that. We've already spoken about violence against women and girls. We are the only party that is guaranteed to champion and prioritize those issues day in, day out, 365 days a year for London's women and girls, but for the benefit of everyone in our city. So, voting for the Women's Equality Party is the way you can bring some political sunshine to London. And God knows we need that right now.
Amen.
Very nice. And I'm going to, I say it here, I said I will be joining the Women's Equality Party. You've sold me.
Yes,
I mean, as long as there's decent catering at any event, I'm at events, I'm there.
We can definitely pull that off. Definitely. And I'd love to talk to you more. When this election is over, I'm sure we can do some stuff together because I just feel like we scratched the surface.
Yeah, no, of course. There's so much to say. That's true. But we'll have you on hopefully again as a guest. Yeah, and thank you so much for making time to speak to us today. This was amazing.
And good luck with the rest of the electioneering.
Thank you.
And good luck for a couple of weeks' time.
And for our listeners, we hope you enjoyed today's show. I really enjoyed it. We've got some more brilliant guests coming up in the next few weeks. We have a new Instagram page, by the way. I don't know if you know this. You don't know this, do you? No. So please follow us on our new Instagram page, Till Death Do Us Pod. Who came up with that name?
You did.
No, it's such a long name. It was. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review, and we will see you next week. Bye.